What is up, my friends? Welcome to another episode of the Father Daughter Dance Podcast, where we help dads keep up with the velocity of how things are changing for our daughters and give daughters and kids the space to talk about their relationship too. Hey, please subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps. In fact, you've done so much of this stuff, as I'm delighted to let you know that my pod has been rated in the top 5% of worldwide podcasts from a Nielsen type rating agency. And the best part is that the listening stats are awesome. Seems you like to listen all the way through. And it's not just because of my silky voice. I know that. Well, I was thrilled this week to be able to have my friend of over 35 years, Heather Hoffman, on the pod. And I like to bring women on the pod who I find inspiring. And, Heather's like a sister to me in a good way. Sometimes when people say, "Oh, you're like family to me," and you learn about their family, it's like, whoa, I don't want to be like family. But no, she's in a good way. And Heather tells the tale of how her dad, Gary, who is also a friend and someone I love, was an influence for her throughout her life and still is. And she opens up honestly about how it felt to not feel like she was the favorite compared to her older sister, Cheryl, who's also a friend, and how she negotiated those feelings. And she's also a great example of a woman who started a second career recently and has been very, very successful. And that has actually brought her and her father closer. And she finishes talking about how she loved bearing witness to how her husband, Marty, who was my college roommate, and an early interview before I launched my pod, how he grew to raise their wonderful daughter, Maggie, and how they had different perspectives on some of the same issues. And, Heather's one of a very small group of people in my life who I never lost touch with during the really dark days for me of my addiction. And there's a couple friends from college and one or two friends from high school, although I've reconnected with a lot of other people. And I spent extended time with her and Marty, and my daughter used to go visit them and their kids, and so many times over the years. And after reflecting on this pod, I realized something. I never really understood the richness and complexity of her relationship with her father, Gary. And Gary and his wife, Alice, they're in a different group for me. I have a group of my friends' parents who treat me like their son, like in a good way. I feel like, what, actually, I kind of know that they would do just about anything for me. And likewise. And it makes me wonder, this is what I would comment on. It makes me wonder, why did it take so long for me to have this conversation I had with Heather? I understand her so much better now. And it dawns on me that so many of my women friends have stories that would help me understand who they are and what they experienced growing up. And it is true, since I launched this podcast and done a lot of work on myself, and also the one person play, the father-daughter dance, my women friends tend to want to talk to me about stuff, and I'm there for it. It's just not uncommon for them to open up about that relationship, but it's more likely someone I know currently and don't have the context of so many years of a devotional friendship like I do. And it's not 100%, but it's true. I just wonder sometimes also how Zoe might talk about me, or if it even comes up. I do know that it comes up with her women friends, because one of the things she writes in the letter that we send to one another each year on our birthdays is that she does reflect on it when she's talking to her friends, that I am more likely and more able to talk to her and listen to her talk about her feelings. It's just such an interesting dynamic how our parents play such a central role in who we are. But I so often just put myself and my attention on where someone is right now, and I don't get the context. And I admit, look, for me personally, I admit I've gone through times in my life where I blame my parents. And that's as far as I went. And ultimately, it negatively impacted me. And through a ton of work, I've gotten myself to this sort of balance that not everybody agrees with, because that's fine with me. I am not in the school of they did the best they could, because I know I'm not in the school myself that I've done the best I could, because sometimes I don't, and I know it. But I got myself to this sort of peaceful balance where I can just say, whatever happened, I have responsibility for it. I'm an adult person. I've got to work through those things. And my parents have accountability for their mistakes. Now, whether they recognize it, my father passed away, my mom's still with us. She's a big part of my life. Whether she recognized it, that's kind of up to her. I would certainly listen and support her in any way that I could. But there's just a difference between sitting in victimhood and being clear enough to understand and accept that level of accountability from them. And because the next step for me then, when I was able to separate that, the next step was forgiveness. And I'm working on that. I've made a lot of progress, but I'm still human. And, I love my mom and I love my dad. But in reality, here's the thing though, right? Let's talk about this for a second. Because it's true with my male friends as well. It's not just my women friends. It just so happens that because I talk so much about fathers and daughters, it's a natural thing. But when I'm with my high school friends and my college friends, where I've got more time with them, and knew them back then in such a different context, it's like I yearn to have deeper conversations. It's sort of like sometimes my friends like sigh when I start talking about stuff, but when I'm one-on-one with them, actually, I find I can have those conversations with certain ones. But as a group, when we're together for a Marquette basketball game, or my high school friends were for a Notre Dame football game, or whatever it is that we're doing, I get very little traction out of the question of, hey, let's talk about our parents and wounds and how we're working through it. It is not well received if I'm going to bring that kind of stuff up. Because typically when we get together, we don't get together that often. We kind of like to keep it light. But look, so be it. I mean, Gary and Alice, who I love dearly, I'm sure had challenges raising Heather. In fact, teaser, she talks about what a challenge she was as a naughty girl. Heather had her naughty girl phase. But including that, however, I loved Heather like a sister before the pod. And now somehow like I love her even more because I feel like I'm closer to her. And I just, thank you, Heather, for the reminder of how I can and we all can connect more completely and understand even the people we love most and have known forever in our lives a little bit better if we just get a little bit curious. And you know what? Are you curious about the pod? Because I am. My friends, won't you join me on the dance floor? Step into the Father-Daughter Dance podcast. Let's do this. Welcome back to another episode of the Father-Daughter Dance podcast. Over the course of the 3 seasons doing this, I say I have special guests. This is a special guest. You are a special guest.
Oh, boy.
And, oh, boy. And for those of you listening, with all due respect to anybody else who has done it over the course of the existence of our shared alma mater, I have today my favorite cheerleader of all time from Marquette University, Heather Hoffman. Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Tim, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and all due respect to Therese Clemente, I have no idea whether she'll listen to this. I'm friends with her on Facebook, but she is second in my heart. You are number one by a long shot. I like in the podcast to have dads on, but I also like to have women I admire who are daughters. And I also happen to know our guest father quite well as well, who is a wonderful man. And this is going to be really exciting to learn about you, Heather. So, Heather, why don't you start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're from, husbands and kids, age if you want, etc.
Okay, so as Tim said, I'm Heather. I'm 54, and I'm a Midwestern girl at heart, but I've been living on the East Coast with my husband for the last 20 years in Connecticut. We've got 3 young adult kids. So, daughter who's 24, Maggie, and our son, 2 boys. So they are 19 and 16, Joey and Charlie.
Wonderful. And Heather happens to be married to my college roommate, Marty, who is near and dear to all of our hearts.
Very true.
So, can we start our conversation by talking about your parents, particularly your dad? I mean, I know and love your mom. Your mom and dad are like second parents to me. But talk about how you learn to relate and connect from your parents.
Well, that's a big question, Tim. But so I was raised in a very, I say, loving household, and my both parents were home. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my life. My dad was in the sales field, and so he was on the road a lot. To be honest, we moved a lot, and he worked long hours and he traveled. So he was super important to me in my childhood years, but he was busy. And so that was kind of normal for us. And so we did a lot of our connecting, I guess, on the weekends. So he was a weekend warrior. And I think that spilled over into my sister and I, like the whole family. We did most of our fun stuff on the weekends. And relating to other people, my dad was social. Like he liked to be around friends. He would always seem to have groups of people. He was really into fitness. So he was in a running club, or he was in a sailing club. So he was a guy that, like I said, he liked to be around other fun and active people. And that's definitely who I am as an adult, for sure.
How was he involved with you on a day-to-day basis? Was it a lot of catch up on the weekend? Or were you speaking to him fairly regularly, even if he was on the road? Or was it really through your mom that you had a connection with him while he was gone?
It's so interesting because we are very close now. And I would say probably since I was an adult, even through upper ages of high school into adulthood. But as a child, it was a bit more old school. I mean, everything went through my mom. And I never doubted my dad loved me. And I knew he did. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me or the way he treated me. I mean, I always felt very loved by him. I mean, I remember one of the first things that we shared. Actually, it's funny, I haven't thought about this in a while, but when I made my first communion, my dad decided to convert to Catholicism. So he had been raised a Baptist. Wow. Yeah. And so he went through the RCIA process while I went through my first communion process. Mm-hmm. And so when we received first communion.
Just real quick, RCIA, for those of you that don't know, what is RCIA?
It's the rite of Christian initiation for adults. So he became Catholic, essentially, at the same time that I received first communion. And I remember thinking that was pretty cool. So that was kind of the first thing that we really shared. Yeah, it was cool. And I'm going to be honest, I actually told my dad I was doing this, and I told him I was going to be honest. I really always believed that my sister was his favorite, 100%. She was just cooler. She was, I don't know, I just always felt like she got more of the attention. I mean, let's remember, I was only 7 when I made my first communion. So that was pretty cool for me to be like, okay, he wants to be with me. He picked me. So yeah, it was special.
That's an interesting thing for a sisterly sibling rivalry. Like, oh yeah, well, he converted to Catholicism for me.
It is
Big deal.
funny.
He took you out to a movie. He converted to Catholicism for me.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I talked about how he was always like a part of things. Sorry. And he took all these photography classes, so he used to always take pictures of us. And he always picked my sister as his model, like always. She was the one that got to go to photography class, and she got to dress up pretty, and my mom curled her hair, and she could go and he would take pictures of her. So that was what we were going through at the time that he picked me to become a Catholic with.
I mean, that's not easy,
No.
you know? I mean, to feel like I'm not being chosen. And have you had that conversation with your father, with your dad over the years, or was it just recently that you had that conversation?
Oh, we never talked about it back then. Not the way, like our kids now, with the three kids, they joke about who the favorite is. It's just a normal conversation in our house. But as growing up, we never, no, you didn't really talk about it. And I mean, I didn't, it's not that I didn't feel loved. It was different. His relationship, we would always say he was closer with Cheryl. I was closer with my mom.
Can you think of a lesson or two that your father taught you that you find in your real life? You're like, oh my God, that's what my dad was talking about. And I can see it now in my life. Like, is there anything that's overtly noticeable in your life that comes from your father?
100%. My dad, there were two things. One was hard work. You don't give up. You don't give in. You always work hard. And then the other one was the importance of trust.
Can you say more about the second one? What is that? How did that play out, or what does that look like?
Um, I was a sneaky teenager and I got into a lot of trouble
Okay.
in my teen years. And that was really hard when my sister went off to college. I was an only child, and I decided I was kind of coming into my own, if I'm honest. Like, I suddenly had a little bit more confidence. I wasn't in anybody else's shadow. I started dating, and I started getting sneaky and getting caught because I was not real good at it. And that was really a difficult time between both of my parents and I. But that was when, and I was like 15, and my mom basically, I mean, I almost feel like there was a discussion like, she's your problem now. You figure it out, to my dad.
Wow. Wow. Breaking news
Yeah.
on the Father Daughter Dance podcast.
Yes.
Heather Hoffman was, sneaky covers a lot of territory. I think the listening public wants to know at least one example of what sneaky means, if you're willing to
Um,
share it.
oh yeah, definitely. I Sneaky means that there was a lot of rules in my house. My parents were very strict. I had an early curfew. I was expected to follow it. I wasn't supposed to be drinking or breaking rules. All of these things were very clear. And I'd watched my sister go through it. So I knew what I was supposed to do. And I was doing otherwise. So I was dating an older guy, and he didn't like all of my family rules, and he made it clear. And so, but I also would lie to him, and I would tell him it's fine. My parents said I could stay out late, and I would stay out late, and then I'd get in trouble. And then that was a problem. So there was a particular night that I went home at curfew, which was like 10 or 10:30, and then said goodnight. And then I snuck back out. We had like a downstairs back door, and my friends picked me up, and I went back to the party. Simple. Until about 1 in the morning when they brought me home, and I went back to the back door and it was locked. It was a
Oh,
problem. And I couldn't get back in. And I
and
was trying to get in, and I forgot that this door was directly under my parents' bedroom window. And all of a sudden, I heard my dad in his very trying to sound tough guy voice. He says, "Who's out there?" And I responded, "Dad?" And yeah, so that was bad because that was it. And he obviously he let me in, and I got the "we'll talk about this in the morning," and that was the end. That was the end. That was like the big, like, he literally looked at me the next morning and he told me, "I don't trust you anymore. We're done."
mm,
Hmm.
oh, that's
So that was tough.
painful.
It was painful.
How did you earn it back?
Well, my dad, being my dad, he made me write a paper, and I did it. I did a research paper on trust and why it's important.
Wow.
And yep, and I had to read it to him, and I cried and I cried, and then we built from there.
Oh, that's really beautiful.
Well, it's
By the
something.
way, let's Gary. That's something. But Gary, if you happen to be listening to this, which I'm betting you will, and Alice will too. Gary and Alice are Heather's father and mother. All this talk about being honest and truthful and trustworthy. Gary Wolfe is one of the most effective, dishonest player of liar's poker with dollars. Like,
That's right.
it's like we we used to play that. A group of the guys played it when your dad would always play, and he would always lie, always, and he was good at it. So
Yes, he was. Still
just
is.
so everybody knows, it's not. Yes, yes, yes. So Heather, how do you handle it in your life now as a woman and over the course of the years when you feel like you have deemed someone or even yourself, if you want to speak to that, as trustworthy and then they break that trust?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that happen, and it's a horrible feeling to have. I mean, I shared, we went through kind of a, not to divert, but we went through kind of a tough time in our family with um, some tough stuff with one of our kids. And in an effort as a mom to try to figure out how to manage it, I would open up to friends. And I had a particular friend that kind of, I felt like used it in a way that wasn't productive and helpful for us as a family, and kind of was hurtful. And it really kind of caused me to shut down and not, and be more guarded on who I was with people. I'm usually a pretty open book, but when it comes back and you feel like somebody takes something that you've shared and uses it in the wrong way, it's an easy way to shut down. So that's what I did.
Yeah, that's painful,
Mhm.
particularly if it's something really important to you. What would you say? Just so everybody's listening knows, I sent Heather a very long list of questions, and I said, I can't promise you that I'm going to ask all the questions because I get interested in what you said. And just so you know, also for the listeners, Heather and I have had like a million conversations over the years. She is as
Mhm.
close to a sister not being in my family as I have. What would you say that you trust most about yourself?
It's kind of changed over time, but I think in the more recent years, um, I trust that I make good decisions about my family and about whether it's, our little family or a five, or if it's our extended family. But I trust that when a decision has to be made, that if I can't figure it out on my own, I'm going to find the right people to help me make that decision. So that's a big one. And I mean, as parents, we make hundreds of decisions, sometimes a day. And I used to really question every step of the way. And now I feel, I mean, gosh, thank goodness my kids are now almost all adults. Like I finally feel like I can make those decisions with confidence.
With your kids and kids, I don't know. Do we still call them kids if they're young adults? I don't know. Whatever.
They're still my kids.
Okay. Got it. With your offspring and even Marty, how, like, let's talk about how effective you are at speaking about your feelings and maybe talk about how it was with your dad talking about your feelings.
All right. So I'll start with I guess, my dad. Growing up, we didn't talk about our feelings. You expressed your feelings and they certainly weren't corrected or, I wasn't a house where, oh, you don't cry or you don't do this or that, but you just didn't talk about it. You were told what to do and you did what you were supposed to do. And if you didn't, you got in trouble. Like that was that. And so there weren't really a lot. I remember in high school when I started to get in trouble and there was discussion about dishonesty or whatever it was. Whenever I got in trouble, I stared at the floor because I couldn't look my parents in the eye and see them disappointed in me. I hated that. So I would stare. I did a lot of staring at the floor. I didn't express what I was really feeling. And so, yeah, there was that. And actually, it's funny. I hadn't really thought about it, but sorry, my dog is. But I don't know if you knew this. But
Oh my gosh!
I'm walking because my dogs want to go outside.
Okay, that's all right. The father-daughter, the podcast can handle dogs. It happens.
Yes, but no. So back to my feelings.
It's suddenly funny. Become the Blair. It's become the. It's become the Blair Witch dog podcast.
Yes, sorry. But I was thinking, we did not talk about feelings. That's what I was saying. But I actually ended up with an eating disorder when I was in high school. I don't know if you even knew that about me. And there was a lot of, I did go to therapy, which was really weird in the 80s, PS, because it wasn't like every kid was doing it like they are now. But a lot of that was around talking about my feelings and like literally my homework. I remember my homework from my therapist was I had to go home and I had to tell each of my parents that I loved them, like to their face.
Oh,
like, which, so you see my parents as they are now, who are the most loving, outwardly emotional, people, whether not just to me, but to our friends are like family to them. They think of all of our close friends as their own children. That's how they are. But growing up, it wasn't always like that. And we've talked about it. That was a huge growth in our relationship, was saying, I love you out loud. And ironically, it happened when my sister was away at school. And I think she was kind of late to the party. And so we had to play catch up on that. And now it's all good, but it's just funny. Like, so feelings were not discussed. And then when I look at how it is now, it's nonstop, like not just between me and my mom and dad, but with Marty and I, we are a very feeling forward family. So maybe to a fault, where we talk about like how things, we talk about decisions and how important it is for them, our children, to know that they're loved, to know that we care about them, and for them to be able to talk about what they're feeling too. So it has kind of made itself full circle so that now I think our whole family is much more open about our relationship. But I really think that stemmed from that time in my youth when I had become super guarded and I had to learn how to do that.
That's really beautiful. That's touching to me because I'm a person who is very comfortable talking about my feelings and love to hear the experience and story of how that comes about, because it really is a generational change, because it's a pattern that oftentimes can be continued if it doesn't find a way to be disrupted. And it's very interesting to me that the eating disorder was such a notable part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate you opening up about that because I've never heard it before. And it does, by the way, it helps me understand. So for the listeners, during my darkest years of my addiction, and some of the most self harming parts of my life, Heather has always been there for me. Heather and Marty, and the Blairs as well. Tim and Donna Blair, those four were with me the whole time. They never stopped supporting me. And now I understand that you talk about this with your eating disorder, that you had a different kind of compassion for what I was going through, because there is a connection to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. I feel closer to you. So was it hard during that time? Actually, this might not be the best question. I know the question I want to ask. The question I want to ask is, if Heather walks in front of a mirror and looks at herself the way I look at her, right? But looks at herself, actually not the way I look at you. You look at yourself. How easy is it for you to say, I love you to yourself? Yeah, that sounded way weirder than it needed to be. It sounded way weirder than it needed to be.
Right. I get where you're going, Tim.
And I'm not going to edit it. I'm just going to. Okay.
No, I get where you're going. I got it. So, I mean, yes. Do I love myself? 100%. Do I feel confident when I look at myself in the mirror? If you're talking body image, not every day, but I now know that that's okay too. So I don't know if that answers the question the way you want it, but I mean,
sort of.
I think self-love, like I do love, I believe that I'm a good person. I believe that all of the things that I do, I'm always trying to be the best that I can be. I love that about myself. But do I look in the mirror and go, wow, you're awesome? Yeah, no, not every day. And that's okay. But what I do is I accept it. I'm okay with it.
And this is a perfect pivot point to a subject that I think is very important to dads who are out there raising daughters of any age, and certainly women who I know listen to this podcast. Speaking of that subject matter, I want to talk about your recent, it's actually not recent at this point, but it's your pivot into a new career.
Right.
And why don't you tell the listeners first what you do, and then we'll get into how did you get into it and sort of the feelings and what happened of what's been happening since then. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm going to go back a little bit because I started my career as a guidance counselor. So I've always been super connected to adolescent development. And that's kind of was always my niche. And then I became a mom and we made the decision that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. So I've been doing that for 20 years and raising our children. So, so that's kind of where I was. And, a little aside to that is for anybody that's raising an adolescent child, totally different than somebody who studied adolescent psychology putting those things into practice, because as a parent, it is a completely different ballgame. So it's okay to feel totally lost. But one thing, what I did recently is I started my own business. I partnered with a hemp wellness company, and the reason why is because I learning. First of all, I didn't know what it was, right? I thought it was pot, and that's not what it is. And then when I learned what hemp is and all the benefits of hemp and how it can really help people with things like anxious feelings, a calm mind, being able to focus throughout your day in a more positive manner. Um, Gosh, did I wish that when my children were going through adolescence and really struggling, that we didn't have a first line of defense to kind of help them manage those feelings and help me as a mom feel more even, because we have a child who really struggles with anxiety. And when he gets anxious, I got anxious and it became a real ugly cycle. So that's kind of was my pivot. So now I've become suddenly this kind of small business owner, and I've had to reinvent who I am in that field. And Tim kind of helped me realize that the most important thing is to be who I am. And that's how I can reach people who, like me, are going through some difficulties and are looking for a natural way to help them feel more balanced as they work through those things. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And I'm convinced that the dog barked because the dog wants to be part of the hemp wellness demographic.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So you started by mentioning the impacts that it has on your anxiety, your calm mind, and it's a great. Everything I read about it and everything you've told me about it is it's a great way to calm you so you can step into life, not to calm you so that is life. Can you talk about the anxieties and fears you had around the time you and I had our conversation? Like, what were your fears? Let's take the fear about it's not pot. Let's just put that one
Like,
aside.
that's just wrong.
Let's talk because you are yeah, but it's also not relevant to the thing that I'm asking you, because I want to know about your feelings going into it to say what were the big fears.
So the biggest fear was that I wasn't going to be good at it. So reality is, it doesn't matter what it was what company I'd partnered with. It was the first time I was entering kind of into the business world in any format. And I didn't think that I was going to be good at that. And I didn't believe that I could be successful at it. That was something that my dad had done in his career. My sister had done in her career, re enter the sibling situation. And they shared that. And that was great. And they could help each other. And that was a great thing. So I was entering kind of this new scenario for myself, and I doubted that I was going to find success and be good at it. And I don't know why that is, just because I guess because I hadn't done it before. Um, and it was all new to me. So that was the biggest thing. I was just going to fail. I wasn't going to be successful.
And so, what was the point at which, like, is there an identifiable point where you said, I see the fear and I trust myself that I can face the fear?
Well, I mean, I said this before to you, but not here. But I mean, part of that conversation that you and I had was really helpful. because um, I it allowed me to see it differently, that I engaging with a group of people, it was me that they were going to connect with. And then once we connected, I could share the information that I had to share and maybe find a way that they would see that this was a good idea for them. So it was kind of a reframing the whole situation. There's not a particular point except for, there's benchmarks for me. So I earned a trip. That was a big one. So that was a big thing. I earned something for me, and that was huge. And I was able to share that experience with Marty, my husband, because I had earned enough in my business to not just earn the trip for me for free and get to fly there, but then I had enough that I'd earned personally that I could then add him onto the trip so that we could have this shared celebratory experience together that I had done. So that was huge.
Right. That is amazing. While we're here, this is going to go in the show notes and such, and when I announce this, but Heather is my Facebook friend. So for anybody who is listening to this, you'll find her at Heather Hoffman, or Heather might send you friend requests, which I endorse. Can you also tell people where they can find you on Instagram? Because that's also a place where you
Yep.
Are active.
So I'm at Hoff House 5. So that's my Instagram. Um, and yep, that's the easiest place to find me. And I share a lot about our family, and I share a lot about our business. And so love to have people join me there.
Awesome. And she dances too in these videos.
I do. Yeah. I learned a lot of my moves from Tim.
Heather and I used to. It's so funny. When we were in college, of course, going to bars underage, we would go to this one. I don't even know if it's still around. It was called O'Donoghue's. We would go dance. But recently, the song You Got the Look by Prince has refound its way into my mix. And that's a song you and I used to dance to when we were having fun.
Yes, I do remember.
Yeah. So just so everybody follows, like when I talk to Heather about, because I know her well, Heather is one of those people in my life who the thing that is shown in social media is who she is. And that was what I was advising her to do. It's like, don't try and be something you're not. It's just so not worth it, because I knew who she was. It's so special. So that's sort of generally what we're referring to, or specifically what we're referring to. But can you, what has your dad said to you about your business success?
It's been really great for my dad and I, because he likes to check in. He follows my social media. He compliments, he's like, you did a really good job marketing that, so he uses kind of his business lingo with me, which we've never really been able to do. He asks me really good questions about how have I thought of, this strategy for something. So it's been a nice conversation point. And it's great. Like, he offers me ideas. Like, so it's kind of given us a new connection that we didn't have before. So I love it. I think it's fun.
So looking back on the decision, let's take it maybe a year before you made the decision, and now where you are now. When you would look at yourself in the mirror, do you feel like you see something different now than what you were seeing then? Or maybe how, if at all, do you see yourself differently now versus then?
I have like a different confidence in myself than I did before. I think you go from being a stay-at-home mom for so long and that becomes your identity, you really have an identity crisis when those children that you've worked so hard to raise start leaving home. And that's what you work for, and it's wonderful, but I think you can kind of take two paths there. And I'm really proud of myself for choosing a path that allows me to find confidence, that allows me to be my true self. And I think that there are people that have known me as a stay-at-home mom for the last, say, 15, 16 years that now see what I'm doing now, and they feel like I've changed. But the reality is where I'm at now is actually the real me. And some of what I did for those years of being a mom and identifying just as a mom and a wife, that wasn't always the real me. And now I'm me again.
That's powerful. Does it make you reflect on your relationship with your mom, given that she was raising you and Cheryl all those years? Like, do you feel like you've learned more about your mom, of who she is, since she is no longer, raising two wonderful daughters?
So I definitely am more 100%. I see it all differently. I think as I think as moms, like you always change your perspective when your children are suddenly grown or you're raising children and you see your parents differently, right? Because now you have this perspective of what life, like what they were going through and how hard it can be. And but yeah, I mean, it's great. I actually was just talking to her about it today, and I was like, she actually did go back to work. It was because my mom, I mean, she paid for my Marquette tuition by working. So that wasn't part of the budget. A private university, it was not in the family budget. So I now see that, like, as an adult, like that was a gift that she gave me all of those years. And I try to remember what it was like when it was just she and I, and my sister had gone to school and my dad was working. Like, I try to remember making dinners together, and I try to remember, like, what did we do between after school and going to bed? Because now I see what my kids do, and I just want, like, I don't really remember what it was like back then, and I wish I could, because I do think you appreciate it so much more, you know. Oh my word. This family
I just love that you are answering that question, and there is a dog tail, just like,
yes.
it's so funny.
Yes.
It's just, it
He is
must
my
be part of the pod.
baby.
It's okay.
Yes, he is my baby.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, it does. It frames everything differently. And I think being in this stage of life as an adult daughter, everything changes, right? So now there's a lot of, I don't thankfully have to care for my parents yet, but it's a different phase. That's for sure. And I'm thankful that I have such a good relationship with them that we've built so that it's easier than it could be.
Got it. There's one thing I want to go back to, which is this. People should be able to see the video, although they're probably going to listen to the audio. Is you mentioned that you look at yourself and you have body image things when we talk about love. And look, you are objectively beautiful. Like, and it is, well, I don't know how much it's colored by the fact that I love you. You're so important to me, but you're objectively beautiful. And so it's just an interesting point to pick up on, and that all this growth is there too. And it makes me want to ask you this question. What would you say to that 15-year-old right now? What would the 15-year-old Heather Hoffman, or Heather Wolfe at that time, what would you say to her?
Well, I think most importantly, like, it's okay to be you, and you don't have to be with a certain group of people to identify yourself. And um, all of those feelings of not, it's okay to not be perfect or like everybody else. And if you don't feel good about yourself, that's okay too. And you can talk about it, because that was the reality. Even though on the outside, I might have looked like I was confident and well liked, on the inside, I didn't feel that. And it wasn't anybody else's fault. Those were just feelings I had. That's one thing I've learned as an adult, right? Like there's not always a cause and an effect to feelings. Like that was just what I felt inside. And it wasn't because I wasn't loved or validated in some way. It was just what was inside of me. And it should have been okay for me to say that.
That leads me to another question, which is the hemp wellness that you are speaking of, which I have given to my daughter, and she really appreciated it. I gave it to her as a gift, several of the products. Do you believe that the wellness products help adolescents and adults to talk about those difficult things? Or do you believe that they take away those feelings? Like, I don't exactly know how to ask it, but that's the best way I could think of it.
Right. So if you're specifically talking about hemp wellness, there's not really a feeling associated with it. So the reality is, for me and for my children that use our products, what it allows them to do is be less reactive to those feelings. So the feelings are there, but to be able to take a pause and work through the feelings in a productive way instead of being reactive when you're in a tough situation. So, in full disclosure, all of us have been through therapy in this house. So we've been taught strategies, we've learned strategies, but sometimes when you're in a really tough spot for whatever reason, emotionally, you aren't able to utilize the strategies that you've learned. And so what I see happening is that using the hemp wellness product allows your brain to kind of take a minute and be able to then use the strategies that you've learned. So it doesn't fix the problem, it doesn't mask the problem. It allows you to work through the problem.
Amen. You're talking my language because I think that, I think, yeah, I think the world would be much better off if people worked on their stuff. And it's my experience that products like that, even if they give you the pause, if I don't have the tools to be able to talk about what's really going on with me uh, in any way other than to create conflict, then the tools are, or then the products are in some ways meaningless and more damaging. So it's like, yes, it helps to calm things and a little less anxiety, but man, when you combine that with, oh, when I have this feeling right now, when it makes me feel that, or not you make me feel this way. It's like, I'm feeling this, I'm hurt. Like that gives you just the space to talk about what's really going on. And thank you for sharing that you've all been through therapy, because I'm a huge advocate of therapy. And those products shared with adolescents, if they don't have parents that are willing to do the work to have the tools and strategies you talk about, it's a very tough ask to actually get the full benefit from them. So that's powerful. Let's actually then move to the last part, because before we get to the point where you're going to be able to talk about whatever you want, I do want to ask you about your work in the schools. Like, when you were working with primarily the girls and young women, depending upon how old they were, like what was the thing that you heard most frequently that you really wished they could see differently?
Well, I worked with, let's say, 11 to 14-year-old girls, and
Okay. All right.
we watched them go, like, from they're still little, they come into one of the schools I worked at was fifth through eighth grade. So if you know fifth graders, they're still cute and sweet and they want to learn and cooperate and they all kind of work together and you can put them in any group and they're able to work things out. And then by seventh grade, that can be a complete shit show. So because then they've now formed their own pod humans. And anytime you try to break up their pod and mix them with a different pod, it's like bedlam. So I wish that there was a way to treat, and this is the word acceptance, but to really help adolescents see the value in each person, just who they are and what they bring to the table, and be accepting of just that. So not the perception of them, but really kind of who they are. And I think it goes back to my experience at 15, where I wish that, I was able to just be my true self and be okay with that. But I remember I had a particular student who kept to herself. She ate lunch alone. She didn't do clubs or anything like that. And every one of her teachers kept saying, you need to meet with this student. Something's wrong. She's upset. She's depressed. She's this. And so I met with her and I tried to put her in social groups and I did all of the things to try to teach her to be a joiner. But you know what? This student was one of the most confident young women I've ever met. She didn't need the acceptance of her classmates. She didn't need to be a part of a group. She was happy just the way she was. And I think she was the answer. And everybody else saw her as the one with the problem. So I wish somehow we could flip that. I don't know how to do it, but I do think that could be the solution of just kids being able to be who they are without judgment.
That is super cool. That's a great story. Reminds me of there was a book by Mindy Kaling, the woman from The Office.
Yeah.
Talked about how she hung out with people who she thought were really cool. And she showed them the Holy Grail from Monty Python, which she loved, and they didn't like it. And it was that moment she realized, I'm with this group because I want to look cool. It's not who I am. And she got a couple of different friends, but it's like being themselves is so important. Do you think Maggie's gotten that?
I think finally, yes. So yeah,
Okay.
our daughter's 24, and I think growing up, she was a confident young girl and did her own thing and never got involved in conflict and all of the drama of middle school and high school. And then she went to college and it's like that all just fell apart. And it
Okay.
kind of identified her. And so she's had to, in the last couple of years, she's really worked on rediscovering who she is. And I'm very proud of her and seeing, I think Marty and I both, we now see she's her true self again. Like, it's so great to see her be her and be confident. And she's fun and she's freaking hilarious. And she's so much like Marty. It's absolutely insane. I mean, we just were together this weekend. I said to her, I was like, do you have any idea how much you're like your dad?
It's interesting to me. First of all, when you said absolutely, I was on pins and needles for the next word. But because I had like 5 words I could have thrown in there, but I just
Gotcha.
said, let Heather answer the question. It's so interesting for me to hear that story about Maggie, who I knew when she was very young, how her journey is going alongside your journey. You both have discovered who you are separately in different ways. That's heartwarming. So Heather, this is the point in the podcast where you have 5 minutes to talk about whatever it is that you want. And this conversation has been So lovely. And it's, you know what? I'm just going to say it. For those of you listening, Heather was nervous about this. Did you, I mean, there's just, come, I guess you can have the nerves if you want, whatever. You've been awesome. You really have. And I'm so touched to share you with my world in this way because you're so important to me. Um, anyway, so you have 5 minutes to talk about whatever you want. It can be whatever you want with regards to daughters. It can be whatever you want regarding women. It can be any perspective you have that you'd like to share with the listeners. The floor is yours.
First of all, this has been fun. Like I honestly was nervous, but it is, as it's played out, it's been cool to be able to have a conversation back and forth. I honestly thought we would talk more about my daughter. So I was glad that you brought that up at the end. And I do think, most of your podcast is about the father-daughter relationship. And that's so valuable. It's been valuable to me as I've grown up, but and become a woman and having such a supportive dad. But it's the coolest thing when you watch a father who happens to be, like, not to be cheesy, the love of your life, raise his daughter. It's really cool. And that could be, and honestly, Tim, like watching you share your journey of raising Zoe so openly is inspiring in so many ways. But I think, all of the coolest thing of like staying connected with all of these old college friends, right? And I hung out with all the guys. Like I was the girl and there was all these guys. But now when we get together and they're dads and we've had the gift of sometimes seeing them with their children. Wow, it's so cool to see. But up close and personal in our house, it's not always been easy. Marty's much more straightforward and than I am, but he always listens. I said we openly share our feelings here. It's because I've pushed for it. And he will take a pause and listen. So I remember at some point when the kids were in a really difficult stage. And P.S., my kids never got along. Like when they were young, they fought. Like we couldn't go out and leave them with a babysitter without expecting to have to come home early because there was literally a brawl happening in my house. So I remember that we finally, Marty was very much cut and dry. Like there's a problem, there's a consequence, it's done. And things would get ugly. And we would argue about how to handle that because I was worried about the emotional piece and he was worried about the right and wrong piece. And what I loved was he would listen to what I had to say. He wouldn't always agree with what I had to say, but he would take it into account and I could watch him shift a little bit and approach the kids in a different way. He never admitted I was right, by the way, not once. But he did listen and I could watch the change happen. And with Maggie, I mean, it was young and they were, it's typical adolescence, right? And there were times that they argued and there was door slamming and it was ugly. And I remember saying to him, you need to make a change because what's in the balance is your relationship with your daughter. Like, so you have to decide, are you going to approach it differently? Because she's not going to change. When they're 15, 16, 17, it's tough to reach them. So he had to shift. And to watch him do that was really impressive.
That's amazing. Talk about trust. That takes trust. Mm-hmm. And, talking about it in coupleship, relationally, bringing that in is really important. I'm glad you brought it to that because it occurs to me that without the relationship you have with your father and your mom, of course, but your father in particular, and your father in particular, that kind of negotiating and moving through the conflict is very difficult to do. So I appreciate all of that, and want you to know again, I love you. I love all of your family. I love Marty. I particularly love you because you came on and did this. And I really appreciate all the times you gave to us, Heather. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.